This time, he returned with another major Crown witness.
Anastasia Topoulou, Tassia we called her, she was presented as being one of the major important Crown witnesses against us. And she was brought over from Greece under police guard at enormous public expense, no doubt, and came into court with evidence that was proposed would be damning to most of the defendants, and it was just unbelievable. In fact, one of the major points of her evidence that was presented by the Crown was that she saw me here twice a week, every week, for a period during December and January of that period. It suddenly came to our realisation that that was impossible, because that was a precise time I was in Europe. I wasn't here. And when I leaned over and told my barrister this, he asked the Crown for my passport so he could examine it, and they refused to give it to him. But the Crown had the passport. They've still got it. It hasn't been returned to me yet. They have my appointment books, so they knew that that just wasn't true, that she was telling a lie.
In a move described by the magistrate as unique in his experience, the prosecution had Tassia stood down 9 days into her evidence. She was so lacking in credibility as a witness that the prosecution also requested that all her evidence be disregarded by the court, presumably because it was so damaging to their case. You will recall that central to the police claims was the assertion that the doctors were paid money to supply false medical certificates.
Yes, another example of Tassia's evidence was when she was asked by the Crown about a conversation that Demos and I had had, and she said she couldn't hear it clearly, but at one stage she saw me doing this, and Mr. Rofe asked her if that had anything of great significance in the Greek culture, and she said, "Oh yes, that means money." And when my barrister, Mr. Lonergan, cross-examined her, he asked her if she'd noticed before I did that whether I'd done something like this and whether I was just getting some dirt from my nose off my fingers. And of course, that was one of the high spots of humour in the case. The court really broke up when they heard that. But that was the standard of most of the evidence that the Crown was bringing, and it was just a farce.
George Theodorakis never visited Dr. Dinnan or Dr. Takminzis in his undercover work, so Inspector Thomas had his surveillance team bug their surgeries.
Okay. All right, we're going to have to put it on the roof.
Okay.
But the resulting 60 hours of tape recordings contained nothing incriminating against the doctors, and half of them were of such poor quality that the police did not put them into evidence.
Can you hear anything?
With the prosecution's case faltering, it became apparent how reliant it was on Nakis's testimony to prove that a conspiracy existed. Remember that Thomas had presented Nakis to the court not as a police collaborator, but as a conspirator who had been caught red-handed, demanding money from an undercover detective. Nakis had played his part in the charade. Now it was Inspector Thomas's turn.
Are any of the people who gave you information which led to your inquiries persons who are in any way connected with this investigation or with the case?
Sir, I'm not prepared to answer that question.
Thomas was now on a razor's edge.
I object to that question, Your Worship. First of all, one objection would be the form of it.
The truthful answer would reveal that he had known Nakis prior to the arrests. Their deception was in jeopardy.
It's too late in the day. I think we'll consider that as new material. Court will adjourn till Monday next.
Saved by the bell, he did not have to answer this question immediately. Instead, he used the adjournment to call an urgent and secret meeting with the prosecution lawyers.
Well done. What's the purpose of this urgent conference?
Thomas revealed that his answer to the crucial question would expose Chris Nakis as having lied under oath. And he admitted that he'd known Nakis for some 7 months prior to the arrests. Records show that this confession hit the prosecution like a bombshell. The credibility of their star witness was now in jeopardy.
The withholding of this information is absolutely outrageous.
This conference, attended by 4 of the prosecution's most senior lawyers, appears to have been an extraordinary breach of the rule that witnesses under cross-examination do not confer with their lawyers unless their opponents are advised. When court resumed, no one on the prosecution team declared their meeting with Inspector Thomas. In fact, the Crown prosecutor spent most of the day arguing why Thomas should not have to answer the original question. So the defence lawyers, following a hunch, changed tack and questioned Thomas specifically about his relationship with Nakis, until the magistrate declared that Thomas was obliged to answer.
Yes, I allow the question as asked.
The question, sir.
Was he known to you?
The question is, was he known to you at that stage?
Yes.
When did you first get to know Chris Narkis?
Objection.
In spite of Mr. Roaf's continued objections, the truth about Thomas, Narkis and the reward was finally revealed. There was now a strong suspicion that all the stories about a massive mafia-type organisation had been made up by Narkis in order to earn himself a huge reward. The media picked up on this scandal, severely embarrassing both the government and all the departments involved in the original reward discussions.
We felt that, well, this has got to be the end of it. The case has got to be called off and there's got to be an inquiry into what's been happening. But I guess we were naive. There was an election coming up, there was no inquiry, and we're beginning to realise that that was where the big cover-up started.
If the case had ceased then, it was an admission of incompetence on the part of senior officers in the Department of Social Security and the Attorney General's Department, and it was in fact an admission of incompetence by the government. So they believed, I think, that they just had to dig in, cover everything up, and resist any efforts to bring this whole sorry episode to an end. The problem was that at best there was incompetence. At worst, there was actually a conspiracy by senior public servants and politicians. And either of those alternatives were not acceptable to a government that was in the difficulties it was in.
It was from this suburb of Peristeri, just north of Athens, that Chris Nakis was requested to return to Australia, all expenses paid by the Australian government, to give evidence about his relationship with Don Thomas. But before giving evidence, Nakis requested a private meeting with Inspector Thomas and a closed court hearing.
So help me God.
Understandably, the magistrate rejected these requests.
Mr. Narkis, when was the first occasion that you met Chief Inspector Thomas?
Well, I don't wish to answer that question.
On what grounds do you refuse to answer that question?
Probably will incriminate me.
I'm sorry?
Incriminate me?
It may tend to incriminate you.
That's correct.
Chris Nakis admitted nothing in court. After a 2-week, all expenses paid stay, he returned to Greece, flying first class. Back in Australia, George Theodorakis, the undercover policeman, took the stand and became the Crown's most credible witness. Now, George's role in the investigation was described by Inspector Thomas in these words. After reading all my Greek mythology, and I think it was Diogenes, spent all his life looking for an honest Greek, I found one and loaded him up with a tape recorder.
It makes me pretty annoyed, a thing like that. I mean, for a start, I think, to be correct, Diogenes was looking for an honest man, not necessarily an honest Greek. And that alters the nature of the thing quite significantly. It tends to infer somewhat of a slur on the general character of Greeks in general. And that's not very nice.
In police parlance, when someone is loaded up, they're saddled with false evidence in order to guarantee a conviction.